What's up, everybody? Chris Pinnell here. We're going with my running back tier rankings for week 9 of the fantasy football season. If you do enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and let's dive right into it. And first off, I gotta mention the running back position looks a little bit goofy this week just because the bye weeks are stretching us a bit thin. Like, we are missing 3 potential S tier backs from last week, and they're not here this time. So no Christian McCaffrey, who always has the number 1 spot no matter what. No Travis Etienne, who's been a baller this year. Jahmyr Gibbs just went nuclear on Monday Night Football without David Montgomery. Then we know Javonte Williams, but he's seen an uptick in workload the previous few weeks as well. So throw them out, and now we're left with what we got. Now it's, it is what it is. We're all playing the same game here. But number 1 for me should be no surprise based off the volume that we've seen from him this year. Now I'll tell you, there's 2 guys in the S tier. Both are very similar style backs. You're probably guessing who it is right now, and you're probably right. It's going to be Alvin Kamara and Austin Ekeler this week. Both these guys end up in the S tier, and the only guys that end up in the S tier. Shout out to Christian McCaffrey. You'll be back next week, but unfortunately, no longer with us for this weekend. But both guys draw very similar matchups. Both guys see similar volume. Although Alvin Kamara gets a bit more volume every single week, so it's going to edge him right ahead of Austin Ekeler for me. On the season, he's seeing right around 17 carries per game, 8.8 targets, nearly 8 catches, 23% target share nearly, 32% weighted opportunity share. Bears are ranked 25th versus running backs. And the Saints, believe it or not, it just goes to show you how awful the games are this weekend. There's a 24-point implied team total, which is one of the highest of the week. They're 7-point favorites at home in the Dome. And if we're going to get pretty much almost 25 guaranteed total opportunities from Alvin Kamara week in, week out, he's basically the offense here because Derek Carr is a check down merchant. You're going to be slotted in number 1 when Christian McCaffrey is out. As for Austin Ekeler, his matchup is 26 versus running backs, so just slightly better. The 3-point favorites, 22.25 implied team total, and he too is seeing roughly 15 carries per game. Now, the targets are much less, 5 targets per game, but right around 45 receiving yards, 14% target share. And I do want to mention, Austin Ekeler just absolutely pieced up the Chicago Bears defense through the air as a running back. On the season, they're kind of getting killed versus them. He had over 100 receiving yards in that one. And now Alvin Kamara gets that same exact matchup this week, so I say good luck to the Chicago Bears trying to defend Alvin Kamara this weekend. Let's move down to the A tier because these 2 are obvious up top. And the first guy up in the A tier is Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. Now, I hate the Giants offense, and I realize he had 41 total opportunities last week, which is absolutely insane. There is some context behind that. Tyrod Taylor got hurt. Darren Waller got hurt. So you had, I believe, Tommy DeVito is his name. I don't think he had a passing yard, I believe. Is that the stat I read? He's not going to be playing this week, so I don't really care. Daniel Jones will be back. I don't know the status of Darren Waller. But either way, Saquon Barkley is basically the offense. Now, Daniel Jones will run the ball a bit, so that might take some carries away here and there. This is still a plus matchup versus the Raiders, who just got demolished by Jahmyr Gibbs last week on Monday Night Football. So I like Saquon just from a volume standpoint. You're pretty much locked in for 20 plus opportunities here. I don't think he's going to get you 36 carries again and 5 targets. The upside is there for it. Now, he hasn't exactly been efficient this season, less than 4 yards per carry. But if you're averaging 22 carries and nearly 5 targets per game with a 20.5% target share, you're definitely going to have to make the A tier just based off of volume alone, especially with the week that we have with bye weeks. Moving on to number 2, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Now, he was terrible on the ground last week. We're talking 12 carries for 17 yards. That equates to 1.4 yards per carry. If you guys don't know, that's pretty bad. But what he did do is he did some damage through the air. 9 targets, 6 catches, roughly around 80 yards, had a nice long touchdown, which saved your day. And if you are in a PPR scoring site, or league, I should say, those catches and targets will add points up in a hurry, even with a bad day on the ground. That's a solid matchup as the Chargers are ranking 20th versus running backs this season and kind of giving it up through the air to RBs as well. Coming in at number 3 in our A tier, we have Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the unfortunate part here is that he is in a timeshare. He is splitting the workload. If he was not, he'd be in the S tier firmly for me this week because we know he's talented. And this is a dream matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, allowing the 2nd most points per game to running backs, only behind the Denver Broncos, over 130 yards per game on the ground, nearly 2 rushing touchdowns. And we've seen his snap share increase every single week since returning, up to 61% last weekend. Unfortunately, we saw 12 carries for Taylor. I wish that was higher. We saw 11 for Moss. And Moss isn't going away. Like, he is not bad out there. So, I get why the Colts are doing it. They paid Taylor a lot of money, though, so they should really start using him more, hopefully. But if we can get 15 plus opportunities from Jonathan Taylor this week and hopefully a few targets, which he is averaging 3.25 targets per game this year and a 10% target share and right around 11 carries per game. So let's just project for 15 touches with the upside of more. I'm hoping this turns into a 70-30 split at some point. If it does, fire up Taylor this week. 23.75 implied team total. They are 3-point favorites. And like I said, cakewalk matchup versus the Carolina Panthers. Then rounding out our A tier, it's just a volume play. Josh Jacobs has been horrendous efficiency-wise this season, 3.1 yards per carry. And that went up from last week because he was over 4 yards per carry. So it's bad that went up instead of down. We're at 3.1. But what I do like is we're getting 21 opportunities per game, 16 carries, 5 targets, nearly a 17% target share. Jimmy G looked horrendous on Monday Night Football, so it should hopefully be a heavy dose of Josh Jacobs. Although I do think they're going to try to feed Devontae Adams because he was frustrated on the sideline. I think he had 11 yards in that game, 2 wide open touchdowns missed. He had a 98-yard touchdown just running free, which, I get it. He was getting blitzed and he had a guy in his face, so I understand missing the throw. But the one throw at the end was pretty inexcusable. Adams was wide open once again, although I'm sure Jimmy G was having flashbacks that whole entire game. He had happy feet. Wasn't fun back there, I can imagine. But Josh Jacobs is volume alone, plus matchup here. The Giants are 22nd versus the run this season. They do come in as 3-point favorites at home. Yeah, mainly just an ugly volume play there. Moving down to the B tier, we have Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs, RB1 here. Very down week for the Chiefs overall. Patrick Mahomes is dealing with the flu, so I'm just going to blame everything on that because it was a great matchup, great everything, had one of the highest totals of the week. They're big favorites, and no one really smashed at all in that game. So we'll just write that one off. Hopefully it's a bounce back performance. Now we are in Germany for this one, so it says it's a home game for the Chiefs, but keep in mind they're not actually playing in Arrowhead. They have a 26.5 point implied team total, which is the highest of the week. They're coming as 2.5 point favorites versus the Miami Dolphins, and it's a plus matchup here. I wouldn't say it's a bad one. They're allowing nearly 100 yards on the ground, nearly a rushing touchdown, but they're still only 15th versus running backs. They're just not giving up too much to the air. But we have seen Isaiah Pacheco in the passing game become way more involved, which does have my interest, especially in PPR leagues. So if you're the RB1 for one of the best offenses in football with the highest implied team total, you have to at least make the B tier and be in the top 10 of my rankings. Tony Pollard, who has been a massive disappointment this season, I would say. He's just not getting into the end zone much at all. Less than 0.3 rushing touchdowns per game this year, only 3.9 yards per carry, and not getting to the end zone as well through the air. So we're not really breaking off big plays, which we saw Pollard do last year. It's almost like he turned into Zeke without the goal line touchdowns, so it's been a bit annoying as a Tony Pollard owner. Not me personally, I'm just speaking for all of you in general. But at some point, something's going to give here for Pollard. He still has one of the more prominent roles in the NFL at the running back position. We know the talent is there, but this is a brutal matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. They're allowing 49 rushing yards per game. Fewest points per game to running backs, 13.8, and only 0.29 rushing touchdowns. So yeah, they've been pretty stiff. So that's why I slid down the rankings this week. Bijan Robinson finally figured out how to get a rushing touchdown, which is nice. I wish the volume was higher. And somehow he had 5 targets last week with 0 catches. I am not sure how that happens for a running back, but we're only seeing 11 carries per game this year, under 60 rushing yards. Like I said, though, finally found the end zone, which was nice. Over 5 yards per carry this season, and 4.25 targets, which equates to a 14.5% target share. So there's been opportunity through the air, and he's still getting you 15 plus touches almost every single week. But man, I really thought we could get around 20 carries per game from Bijan Robinson. That's unfortunately not happening. If he was, he would be in the A/S tier. That's unfortunately not the case. So he's going to be in the B tier this week, but it's a decent matchup versus the Vikings. Their defense overall isn't great, but versus the run, they have been a bit more stiff this season. DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles, he cracks the B tier as well. Great role and a great offense, nearly 5 yards per carry this season, 15 carries per game, 70 yards on the ground, and also 3.5 catches on 4 targets with a 12% target share. Matchup's not so great. They currently rank 7th versus the run, the Dallas Cowboys, so I don't love the spot. If I did, he'd be a little bit higher, but he still cracks the RB1 range this week. Then we have Raheem Mostert here of the Miami Dolphins. Now, it's a bit of a 3-headed backfield now. Salvon Ahmed, we saw, had 4 targets. Jeff Wilson had a handful of carries. Mostert still led the way in snaps and usage, but it is kind of annoying that everyone's healthy here, and then I don't even want to know what's going to happen when Devonta Chan is back. So enjoy Mostert while you can, but it's a pretty tough matchup versus the Chiefs. They are allowing the 5th fewest points per game to running backs, but it's such a great offense, and Mostert, we know, is a pretty highly efficient back with the touches that he gets. About 5.5 yards per carry so far this season and a touchdown a quarter. Got into the end zone last week on 13 carries. I wish the other guys would go away. If they did, he'd be much higher, but they're not. But this is just how it has to be. Moving into the C tier, we're getting into some boring, ugly volume plays, but that's all it takes to be relevant. The running back position these days in the year of 2023. But leading us off is old and dusty Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'll tell you what, if you're talking about any efficiency, that's Joe Mixon. But he's at 4 yards per carry this year, which is a little bit better than guys like Tony Pollard, better than Josh Jacobs. So we'll give him some credit there. Seeing about 3 targets per game on a 10% target share. But you're also getting 16 carries per game, 65 yards, and always a crack at a touchdown, although the touchdowns haven't really been there so far this year. But the Bills are pretty bad versus the run, ranking 24th versus the position, 100 yards per game on the ground, and 45 receiving yards. Bengals have one of the highest implied team totals of the week at 25.5. This game's on Sunday night in primetime. They're 2.5-point favorites. About as good of a spot as you can get for Mixon. I know the Bills aren't like a pushover matchup or anything, but they have been pretty leaky versus running backs this season. If we add a couple of catches on that, I would take it. And then we have Derrick Henry, the Tennessee Titans, new quarterback situation over there. So hopefully it just kind of injects some life into this offense, which we did see last week versus the Falcons defense, which has been pretty solid this season. So hopefully Will Levis does provide that spark that this offense desperately needs. Because if you look up boring in the dictionary, it's probably just a big fat picture of Ryan Tannehill. Honestly, Derrick Henry's not too far behind him this season. The efficiency has gone down, 4.4 yards per carry. But if he's going to get the volume like we saw last week, had over 20 carries, got over 100 yards, don't remember if he hit the end zone or not, but if he does get into the end zone, you're always going to have that nice upside. It's a Thursday night game. We're getting into the colder months is when Derrick Henry tends to shine. It's a pretty solid matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're allowing nearly 120 rushing yards per game. They're 21st versus running backs. So just from a volume standpoint, if you're going to get 15 carries as an NFL running back, you're going to have fantasy relevancy. Just the way this position is this week and in general. Rachaad White comes up next. Now, he gets the volume, but he's been terribly inefficient. 3.3 yards per carry. Gets 13 carries per game, which is nice. 40 rushing yards. But we've seen 13 targets the past 2 weeks. A game with 7 targets, a game with 6. And that is great if you are in a PPR league. It does not have to be efficient. Those catches will add up in a hurry. But it's a good matchup versus the Texans as they do rank 23rd versus running backs. Ken Walker, we saw him in like the S tier a few weeks ago in a good matchup versus the Cardinals. But we've seen Zach Charbonnet's workload and snaps increase recently. And that's a direct hit to Ken Walker. So if we're not going to get the average of 16, 17 carries, 4.4 yards per carry with a crack at the end zone, doesn't get too involved in the passing game, has been seeing like 2.5 targets on an 8% target share. But if Charbonnet's workload is going to increase, that's going to be a little bit concerning as a Ken Walker owner. So it's something to keep an eye on. If it goes back in Walker's favor, if he's going to get you double-digit carries, close to 15, that's when he can kind of make that leap into the B and A tier, depending on the matchup. Middle of the road matchup here versus the Ravens, 16th versus running backs. They come in as 5.5-point dogs on the road with only an 18.5 implied team total. So not the biggest fan of the Seattle backfield this week, but I am going to be curious to watch how it unfolds snap-wise and usage-wise, because Charbonnet definitely looks like he's trending up over there in Seattle. James Cook of Buffalo is going to round out our C tier here. Not exactly excited about him. He's just not really been a touchdown threat this season, but he has been pretty efficient with the touches that he does get. We're at nearly 5 yards per carry this season. 23-point implied team total here versus the Bengals. They're 18th versus running backs, allowing 100 rushing yards per game. 2.5-point spread in the Bengals' favor, but this game's going to be on Sunday night in primetime. Very excited to watch this one play out. 3 targets per game, 7.5% target share. The big issue with James Cook is Latavius Murray exists, and they like to use him, and they like to use him around the goal line, plus Josh Allen's a threat around the goal line as well. And they did add Leonard Fournette. Now, I'm not expecting him to make any sort of impact in his first week, but in weeks to come, that's going to hurt this backfield because they didn't just add him for fun. He's going to be involved at some point, I would believe. So that's just going to make this a very messy backfield as we're going to have James Cook, Leonard Fournette, and Latavius Murray, and Josh Allen as well competing for carries. Moving down to our D tier here, we're going to kick it off with Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. And he has been terrible this year, just to put it lightly. I'm sure you are not excited about where you drafted him this season, as it was decently high up in the rounds. But 3.2 yards per carry. The only thing that's saving him for fantasy purposes is that he has a 12.5% target share, 4 targets per game, and over 3 catches. Because on the ground, you're getting less than 4 points per game based off of that. And he's just not really getting into the end zone because this Patriots offense stinks, and they just don't have many scoring opportunities. And it's not like it's a great matchup either. The Commanders are much worse versus the pass than they are versus the run. Although they did lose Chase Young, which is definitely a hit that defensive line, as they traded him away to San Francisco, who is a very loaded defensive line now with Nick Bosa. The 13th versus running backs. The only reason you're playing Stevenson is because he can catch a couple of balls, but outside of that, there is not much upside here unless he happens to fall into the end zone, which doesn't really happen that often. Then we have Gus Edwards. Speaking of guys that get into the end zone, 4 touchdowns the previous 2 weeks, 3 touchdowns last weekend versus the Arizona Cardinals. Had a great game on the ground, nearly 20 carries. Middle of the road matchup here versus the Seattle Seahawks, but I do like the potential game script for the Baltimore Ravens. 24 implied team total, 5.5-point favorites. They're playing at home. He's over 4 yards per carry this season. Not going to get you anything through the air, only a 3% target share on the season. But if we can get 15 plus carries out of Gus Edwards with goal line work, that is going to be relevant for sure. Then we have the duo of Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt. I didn't really know how else to rank these guys besides putting them side by side. Now we've seen when Jerome Ford is healthy, he's the main back here. He outsnaps, outtouches Kareem Hunt. Last week, he was very iffy to play with the ankle sprain, ends up playing. Kareem Hunt did get more work. So it's a little bit concerning because I'm not sure if it's just going to be a complete even split going forward, or maybe they give Kareem Hunt more work because he knows the system well, which I know Jerome Ford does too. But It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But if we assume a 50-50 split, this is a great matchup versus the Cardinals. They're 29th versus running backs. They're allowing the 4th most points per game. I mean, this is the defense that just allowed Gus Edwards to go nuclear versus them. So both are playable in a very plus matchup. I do not know what the quarterback situation is going to be for the Cleveland Browns yet this week. But either way, both are in a really good spot. Aaron Jones has been just almost impossible to use this season. He did have one great game, Chicago Bears. I think that was either week 1 or week 2. But other than that, he has been an absolute no-show in this offense. I mean, just an offense led by Jordan Love, I get it. There's just not too much upside. He is involved in the passing game, though, quite a bit, which is nice. It keeps him relevant. Over 3 targets per game, 11.5% target share. But we're averaging 7 carries and 30 yards on the ground, and it's just almost unusable. So unless he's going to get you 5+ catches in the game, I don't really see how Aaron Jones is going to offer too much upside. We know he has big play potential, but he just really hasn't been able to flash that. Emari Demercado, going to round out our D tier here. And while it's not a pretty play versus the Browns defense, they're currently allowing the 10th fewest points per game to the running back position. He did see a ton of volume last week. And if you're going to get volume, if you're going to get 15+ opportunities, still no James Conner. And it looks like Josh Chomps is gone. So it's either going to be Kyler Murray or Bryce Tooney. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. I apologize. One of those guys will be starting at the quarterback position. But either way, Demercado has established himself as the RB1 with no James Conner. And if you're going to be the RB1 in an offense, it's guaranteed pretty much for 10, 15+ touches. I mean, you at least have to be on the list. And then we move on to the F tier, and it gets really ugly at this point. But I understand if you have to start some of these guys. Like, I'm in that same boat. I'm in an 18-team league. So honestly, like, these F tier guys end up being my RB1 some weeks, so it's not too pretty out here. But we're going to roll with Darrell Henderson as the leader of the F tier. And he did get put back down to the practice squad, but they do have 1 left to use on him, and I'm assuming they will once again. So pretty much going to be getting double-digit touches here of Henderson. He's actually had double-digit points in PPR scoring each and every single week. It's a really good matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. They're currently ranked 30th versus running backs. And through 2 games for Henderson, 15 carries after a rushing touchdown, 46 yards. It's only 3.1 yards per carry. But we're also getting 2 targets mixed in there, 9% target share. Now, the quarterback situation for the Rams does not look too pretty this week. I'm not sure if it's going to be Matthew Stafford or not. But either way, Henderson should be getting 10+ touches, which is all we can ask for, even though it's not going to be pretty. Zach Moss has honestly been really good at football this year. If you're looking at his overall numbers, they're a bit skewed from the weeks that Jonathan Taylor wasn't playing. But he's at 4.7 yards per carry, which is really good. 18 carries per game, 85 yards, 0.71 rushing touchdown. And the Colts are honestly not in a bad spot this week. 24-point implied team total. They come in as 3-point favorites. And the matchup versus the Panthers is incredible. We already talked about it with Jonathan Taylor. But, I mean, they're allowing the 2nd most points to running backs. And there should be enough to go around for both these guys to have value. So Zach Moss is fine as an RB3 this week or a flex play, depending on how deep your league is. Chuba Hubbard looks like he's going to have the starting role over Miles Sanders. I mean, last week, Hubbard definitely struggled quite a bit, but he's been nearly 4 yards per carry this season, and the Colts are 27 versus running backs, so he's fine. He's going to get just 10+ touches with a little bit of passing game involvement. Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders, it's not going to be pretty. The Patriots are bottom half of the league versus running backs, though, currently ranking 19th versus the position, and he's getting around 12 carries per game. Not too much involved in the passing game. That's more so the Antonio Gibson role, but if he falls into the end zone, you'll be happy. If he doesn't, though, you're probably getting like 5-6 points, which you're not going to feel good about. But at this point, there's really not much else to like down here. You have the duo of Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Warren's going to offer you more PPR upside. On the season, he has a 14.5% target share, 4.3 targets per game, 3.6 catches, nearly 30 receiving yards. Not getting too much on the ground, though. About 6 carries, 25 yards. So it's not awful. Nearly at 4 yards per carry this season, which is really right on par with Najee Harris. I would say Najee Harris has more touchdown upside, but on the season, I mean, it's really been about the same. So you are in a PPR league. I would say Jaylen Warren has a little bit more appeal there, but Najee Harris is just going to get more volume. And then Alexander Mattison in this offense is probably going to suck with Jaren Hall at quarterback. No more Kirk Cousins, which people like to give him flack, but honestly, he's a pretty solid quarterback. And you don't have Justin Jefferson anymore. So it's going to probably be a full-on disaster here. It's a tougher matchup versus Atlanta, especially for Madison. They're 2nd versus running backs this year, so I just don't really see any upside at all out of anybody. I mean, the ball's going to go somewhere. I feel like Hawkinson should be a decent safety valve for him, but I'm not expecting too much. Then we have the elite tandem of Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce. I mean, Pierce obviously is the preferred option. 15 carries per game compared to Devin Singletary at 7. Now, Singletary did get 10 carries last week, which was nice, but I mean, I'm not sure how you can really want to start anybody in that Houston backfield too much. I like the wide receivers over there. You have Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Even Noah Brown has some starting value, but the matchup's not very great, and you can't expect much upside. With that being said, guys, that's all I got for the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel on your way out. I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll have my wide receiver video later on today.